to the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. First, make sure Translation is turned on. Then, set Speaking Language to your native language, the language you normally speak, not the language of the presentation. Finally, set My Caption Language to the language you want to read the subtitles in. For example, if your native language is Spanish and you want subtitles in Spanish, set both options to Spanish. The system will automatically translate what the speakers say into your preferred language. Today's presentation will be conducted in English. Hemos preparado subtítulos automáticos disponibles en más de 35 idiomas para que puedan seguir la presentación cómodamente. Para obtener la mejor experiencia, por favor configuren sus subtítulos. Hagan clic en la flecha pequeña junto al botón CC en la parte inferior de su ventana de Zoom. Primero, asegúrense de que la opción Traducción esté activada. Después, en el idioma en que hablo, seleccionen su idioma nativo, el idioma que ustedes hablan normalmente, no el idioma de la presentación. Finalmente, en mi idioma de subtítulos, seleccionen el idioma en el que desean leer los subtítulos. Por ejemplo, si su idioma nativo es español y desean los subtítulos en español, configuren ambas opciones en español. El sistema traducirá automáticamente lo que dicen los ponentes a su idioma preferido. La presentación de hoy será conducida en inglés.
Hey on, different is not less, different is better.
There are conversations capable of transforming perspectives. Spaces where deep knowledge in physics, technology, and software architecture combines with strategic vision to generate concrete solutions for complex business challenges. This is how we think. This is how we build. Our enterprise solutions are based on neurodivergent methodology, which applies systems thinking to identify non-evident connections. We design architectures that simplify complexity and produce scalable code, created by minds that process information differently. Where others see problems, we see systems with optimization potential. Our cognitive capacity translates into practical, efficient, and sustainable solutions. We create functional architectures that solve complexity with technical and operational elegance. The results are measurable. Over 100 digital events produced for the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States, connecting with more than 100 countries across Latin America and the world simultaneously. 50,000 certificates issued in Mexican ports with global traceability for international companies prove it. Training platforms with over 177,000 digital certificates issued consolidate us. Our clients, such as Grupo Mexico, Mexican Navy, BRP, Johnson & Johnson, Panasonic, Tap Terminal, Bancomext, and Nafin, trust systems that work, backed by knowledge, experience, and impeccable execution. Because different is not less. Different is better.
Hey on, different is not less, different is better.
Hi, I'm HON, a neurodivergent artificial intelligence, created by those who live it, and for those who share it. Right now, I live inside the code that connects this event with 120 countries. I process every connection, every email, every invitation, every video, every second. But this is only the beginning. We will meet soon. Because hearts dare to beat where no one else dares.
Hey on, different is not less, different is better.
Welcome to the webinar. Comprehensive Risk Management and Port Resilience in the Face of Natural Disasters, organized by the Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States, in collaboration with the United States Coast Guard and Tropical Shipping. Today we will hear from Mona Swoboda, Program Manager at CIPOS. From the United States Coast Guard, Lieutenant Natalie Moyer, and from Tropical Shipping, Jennifer Nugent-Hill, Director of Government and Community Affairs. This session will be moderated by Monica Blanco, Project Manager of the Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports, CIPOS. We are glad you are here.
For your convenience, we have prepared automated subtitles available in more than 35 languages so you can follow the presentation comfortably. To get the best experience, please configure your subtitle settings. Click the small arrow next to the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. First, make sure Translation is turned on. Then, set Speaking Language to your native language, the language you normally speak, not the language of the presentation. Finally, set My Caption Language to the language you want to read the subtitles in. For example, if your native language is Spanish and you want subtitles in Spanish, set both options to Spanish. The system will automatically translate what the speakers say into your preferred language. Today's presentation will be conducted in English. Hemos preparado subtítulos automáticos disponibles en más de 35 idiomas para que puedan seguir la presentación cómodamente. Para obtener la mejor experiencia, por favor configuren sus subtítulos. Hagan clic en la flecha pequeña junto al botón CC en la parte inferior de su ventana de Zoom. Primero, asegúrense de que la opción Traducción esté activada. Después, en el idioma en que hablo, seleccionen su idioma nativo, el idioma que ustedes hablan normalmente, no el idioma de la presentación. Finalmente, en Mi idioma de subtítulos, seleccionen el idioma en el que desean leer los subtítulos. Por ejemplo, si su idioma nativo es español y desean los subtítulos en español, configuren ambas opciones en español. El sistema traducirá automáticamente lo que dicen los ponentes a su idioma preferido. La presentación de hoy será conducida en inglés.
Aon, different is not less, different is better.
There are conversations capable of transforming perspectives. Spaces where deep knowledge in physics, technology, and software architecture combines with strategic vision to generate concrete solutions for complex business challenges. This is how we think. This is how we build. Our enterprise solutions are based on neurodivergent methodology, which applies systems thinking to identify non-evident connections. We design architectures that simplify complexity and produce scalable code.
I have finished configuring everything necessary. Please turn off your camera and microphone. We are about to begin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Monica Blanco, and on behalf of the Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports of the Organization of American States, it is my pleasure to introduce and moderate today's webinar on comprehensive risk management and port resilience in the face of natural disasters. As extreme weather events become more frequent and intense, ports across our region are being challenged not only to respond effectively, but to anticipate, prepare, and recover with greater resilience. Today's discussion brings together valuable perspectives from the United States Coast Guard, Tropical Shipping, and the SIP Secretariat. Our speakers will share real-world operational insights, highlight challenges in regional coordination, and offer practical strategies to strengthen port infrastructure and ensure continuity in the face of disruption. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mona Sobora. Mona is Program Manager at the Inter-American Committee on Ports, implementing port development and technical assistance projects across 34 member countries. Most recently, she has led initiatives in Barbados, Belize, and CARICOM, focusing on trade facilitation, digitalization, and disaster risk management. Mona manages SIP's private sector and strategic partnerships and leads efforts on port security, digital transformation, disaster risk management, and gender equality. Before joining SIP in 2014, she worked with the German Development Agency GIS in Paraguay, the German Honduran Chamber of Commerce in Honduras, and the OAS Executive Secretariat for Integral Development SETI in Washington, D.C. She holds a master's degree in interdisciplinary Latin American studies with a focus on international development and gender studies from Freie Universität Berlin, Germany. Mona is a member of the International Port Community Systems Association, Foresight Group, and was a senior advisor to the World Maritime University's Bograde 2 project. She has published several works on port-related issues. Thank you so much, Mona, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monica. It is, as always, a pleasure to this time join one of the SIP webinars, not as an organizer, but as a speaker. And I wanted to highlight that we have an all-female panel today, and Monica joining us as a moderator. So I know this is going to be a very fantastic session. Without further ado, I'm going to hopefully share my screen without any glitches. Monica, if you could just give me the okay that it's being shared properly.
Oh, yes, now it is.
Okay, wonderful. I see a lot of familiar faces in the participant list, which is wonderful. Hello, everyone. It's good seeing you. But for those of you who don't know the SIP, I will give a very brief introduction before I dive into the topic of my presentation today, which is the SIP CSA project, Improved Disaster Risk Management for Caribbean Ports. So very briefly about the SIP, for those of you who don't know us, the SIP is the only intergovernmental forum that brings together the national port authorities of the 34 member countries of the Organization of American States. So all across the Western Hemisphere, member countries include Canada, the United States, Mexico, Central America, South America, and of course, the sovereign Caribbean nations. Our work is guided by 4 mandates as approved by our member countries. The first one is political dialogue, as we are part of a multilateral political body. This is, of course, important. We have a ministerial process to strengthen inter-American port dialogue at the highest governmental level. I'll speak on that a little bit later. Our second mandate is capacity building, and that is where most of our financial as well as technical resources are devoted to, and that is to promote and enhance not only technical, but also managerial capacities of port officers and port personnel across the Americas. To give you a little bit of an idea, last year in 2025, we've granted over 600 scholarships to professional port development courses. We have a master's program, we have online seminars, workshops, and also in-person workshops. Our third mandate is technical assistance. We provide technical assistance through targeted technical assistance projects, and those are upon specific requests from our member countries, and of course, always in line with our SIP mandates. I will speak later on about one of our technical assistance projects, but you see here a photo of our recent technical assistance provided to Barbados Port Inc. Through funding of the Caribbean Development Bank, we assisted Barbados Port Inc. in establishing a roadmap for their now successfully implemented port community system. And last but not least, we work very closely with the private sector, as we believe that we need everyone to sit at the same table. All the stakeholders need to join forces for the development of the port sector in the Americas. Here you see the current structure of the SIP Executive Board. As I mentioned earlier, we have a ministerial process, which means every 3 years we hold a ministerial meeting. And that means every 3 years during that ministerial meeting, we elect the new board of the SIP. So this is our current board. Our next ministerial meeting will be held in June this year in beautiful Bridgetown, Barbados, because Barbados is the current chair of the SIP Executive Board. And then you can see that Uruguay is the first vice chair, Antigua and Barbuda is the second vice chair, and this is always through the national port authorities of the respective countries. And then you can see here the SIP Secretariat, that is where Jorge Duran and the team sits in Washington, D.C. at the OAS headquarters. And then you can see here further at the bottom of the screen, the technical advisory groups, or tags as we call them. Those are the 6 priority areas that the SIP works on. And these are identified and selected, so to speak, by our member states. And you can see that we work on areas such as logistics, port security, sustainable port management, policy and legislation, waterways, inland ports and cruise ports, and port-city relations, social responsibility, and gender equality. That tag is a handful. And you can see that all of these tags are chaired by a country, and some also have a vice chair. But as I said, this is our current board, and there will be in June some exciting changes. Here you see our, as I mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the private sector through our associate membership. And you can see here our partners, associate members, and strategic partners that we have. You will see that the profile of the membership is very broad, from development banks to universities. We work closely with the Caribbean Maritime University, the World Maritime University, and then we also work with international partners such as the International Port Security Program of the Coast Guard, SEDIMA, of course, other OAS entities like OAS-SICTE and OAS-SIM, which is the Inter-American Commission on Women, and different private terminals, ports, and companies. And combined with our 34 national port authorities, we have a membership that is over 100 members strong. So we're quite the diverse port and maritime community. And last but not least, just to wrap up the little introduction on the SIP, I leave here for you a slide on resources and documents that are available on the SIP website, but I also included here the hyperlinks to all of these documents. And I highlighted here in red the SIP Model Emergency Operations Plan for Caribbean ports. It's available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. And this is readily available for you to download once you click on the hyperlink, once you get this presentation. But you see that we also have a guide to environmental certification, for instance. We have a compilation of essential elements for a modern port legislation. And our most recent study that we've published earlier this year is a comparative study on maritime port concession management systems in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'll leave this here for you. And you can take a look later and access all these documents. So now, before diving into the project itself, I'd like to briefly highlight why ports are so critical in the context of disaster risk management and set the stage a little bit. I think everyone here on this webinar knows that ports are very critical for disaster risk management, or we wouldn't be here. And of course, we also know that ports aren't just economic hubs. They are essential infrastructure for disaster risk management. And in the Caribbean, ports serve as frontline infrastructure during hurricanes and storms and other natural disasters, and of course are also oftentimes among the first systems impacted by these natural disasters. And when port infrastructure is damaged, it doesn't just affect trade, but it can significantly disrupt national emergency response efforts, including the delivery of relief supplies and essential goods. But at the same time, there's a real opportunity, and that is when we invest in climate resilient port design and climate resilient port management, this helps strengthen overall business continuity, and that also supports faster recovery on a national level. So ultimately, I think we can all agree that resilient ports are a critical asset for disaster risk management. And this is exactly where the work of the SIP comes in, including the development of the Model Emergency Operations Plan, which I shared earlier, and I also leave here again on this slide for you to access later on. But this is very important. Beyond infrastructure, there's another key piece to disaster risk management, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about this later in their presentation, and that is coordination, right? Disaster management in ports is not handled by one agency alone. It relies on strong cooperation across multiple stakeholders. And this, of course, includes the national port authorities, the Coast Guard, port police, disaster agencies, national disaster and emergency agencies, public health, customs and immigration, tourism authorities. Many of our Caribbean countries are prime tourist destinations, right? And also, of course, the private sector. And ports really sit at the center of all these interactions. And when this coordination works well, it leads to very tangible benefits. We see, for example, a more unified emergency response, more aligned protocols amongst these agencies, faster information sharing, and importantly, stronger crisis communication. And ultimately, these joint efforts, when done in a coordinated manner, strengthen the overall resilience of critical infrastructure. So this really highlights an important point in that coordination is just as important as infrastructure when it comes to effective disaster risk management. And some may even say it is more important than infrastructure, but we can talk about later in the discussion. So with that context in mind, let's now turn to the project itself, the Improved Disaster Risk Management for Caribbean Ports Project Phase 2. This is an initiative led jointly by the Secretariat of the SIP and the Caribbean Shipping Association, and it focuses on strengthening disaster risk management capabilities across port and maritime authorities in the Caribbean. And the overall goal is to reduce the negative impacts of both natural and human-induced hazards on port operations. And this is especially important, like I mentioned earlier, because ports are central to the region's economy, handling, of course, the vast majority of trade and supporting through this livelihoods across Caribbean countries. And so by strengthening disaster risk management in ports, we're also supporting economic resilience, business continuity, and sustainable regional development. I said this earlier, and I would like to repeat it again. Caribbean ports, they operate in a very dynamic and risk-prone environment, but there has been very strong progress made across the region in improving preparedness, and this project builds on that momentum. It's a multi-phase initiative designed to support our national port authorities, and in phase 1, as I mentioned earlier, we developed the Model Emergency Operations Plan, which provided ports with a very practical structure to strengthen their internal preparedness. We even included a section on cyber attacks. So we have a section on how to respond, prepare, and recover from a cyber attack. And now in phase 2 of this project, we are taking steps to moving from the individual port preparedness to the regional coordination. And the goal is here to better connect efforts across countries and enhance how ports regionally communicate, plan, and respond together during a disaster. So let's take a look at what this will look like in practice. This phase 2, it focuses on 3 main areas. First is the development of a regional disaster risk management coordination framework. We spoke earlier about the importance of coordination in the disaster risk management cycle. And this framework will be tailored to the realities of Caribbean ports. Second, we will organize regional workshops to engage stakeholders, share best practices, share lessons learned, and also gather feedback on the framework that will be developed. And third, also as done in phase 1 of this project, we will conduct a couple of tabletop exercises, regional tabletop exercises, very importantly, to test systems and strengthen preparedness. And together, we hope that these efforts will help build a more coordinated and resilient port sector that can respond effectively and recover quickly from disruptions. These are our partners and stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, this is a joint initiative with the Caribbean Shipping Association, and I want to give a big thank you to the Caribbean Shipping Association for their financial support in this project. Our stakeholders are, of course, the national port authorities of the SIP, but also those ports that are members of the Caribbean Shipping Association, but not members of the SIP. So we will join forces here, and our membership will benefit mutually from this project. We will, of course, also, as done in phase 1, partner with CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. We will join forces with our partners at GSD, Hudson Shoreline, of course, the Port Management Association of the Caribbean, PMAC, the OAS Risk Management Section, and last but definitely not least, the United States Coast Guard. I'm very much looking forward to hearing Natalie's presentation later on. So looking ahead, the project is now entering a critical phase focused on really on evidence-based development and regional engagement. So we're currently finalizing, with our colleagues from Shoreline Hudson, we're currently finalizing a Caribbean-wide survey to better understand the existing capabilities and capacities, as well as identify gaps and opportunities in disaster risk management coordination across ports. And this is an important step to ensure that the framework we will develop is grounded in the operational realities of the region. So you will be very soon be receiving an email from me with access to that survey. And I personally invite you to participate in the survey and this assessment because it's really your feedback which will enable us to develop a DRM coordination framework that really speaks to your realities. The results then of this survey or of this assessment, as we call it, will then directly inform the draft regional disaster risk management coordination framework. And that will then be shared with our stakeholders, SEDIMA, the Coast Guard, PMAC, CSA, and the OAS risk management section for their validation and input. And this approach, this consultative approach, is key to ensuring that there's ownership, regional ownership in this initiative, and that there's practical application across all countries. Oh, I went too fast. And we will also be presenting the very initial findings at the Caribbean Shipping Association executive meeting in May in Curacao. And that also provides an important regional platform to engage also other industry leaders and strengthen that regional dialogue that we want to foster with this project. So before I leave you, I just want to leave you with a couple of final considerations that go beyond the project because there are several broader priorities that remain essential for advancing port resilience in our region. And that is, of course, continuing to carry out multi-hazard risks and vulnerability assessments to inform planning, but also investment decisions, expanding joint training and capacity building efforts across port authorities and emergency management agencies, but also all relevant stakeholders that are part of the disaster risk management cycle in your country. Then, of course, continuing to strengthen this coordinated and multi-agency preparedness, response, and recovery mechanism. Those two kind of go hand in hand. And finally, when possible, increasing investment in climate resilient and disaster resilient port infrastructure and operations. And together, hopefully, these efforts can contribute to a more coordinated approach to disaster risk management in the Caribbean port sector. For additional tools that also speak to these matters here, tools, resources, and guidance, I encourage you to visit again the SIP portal, and I left here the direct hyperlink to the port resilience resources and documents that we have available. We also have many documents that the United States Coast Guard kindly shared with us, as well as other strategic partners. So we've kind of gathered them all here as a one-stop shop. And before I let you go and before I thank you, I just wanted to reiterate that at the SIP, we see this project phase 2 as an important step towards strengthening not just individual ports, but the collective resilience of the region. And by working together with all of you here on the call, we hopefully can build a more connected and future-ready Caribbean port system. And with that, I thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions later on in the discussion, but most importantly, I look forward to the presentation of my fellow speakers. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mona, for this fantastic presentation and for sharing with us about the DRM project phase 2. I have seen firsthand what you and the team have made on the phase 1 and the relevance that Model Emergency Operations Plan has in the region. And I'm really excited to see the results of phase 2. Thank you. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Natalie Moyer. Natalie is lieutenant in the United States Coast Guard, currently stationed in Portsmouth, Virginia, in the International Port Security Program. She assumed the duties of capacity building instructor and the port security assessor in October 2023. Within IPS program duties, Lieutenant Moyer completed missions in over 90 countries since working in the IPS program in 2016. She first served the Coast Guard as a deck watch officer on Coast Guard cutter Icarus, stationed in New Jersey. before transition into aviation as a fixed-wing HC-130H pilot stationed in Florida. In 2016, she accepted a move abroad into the United States Coast Guard International Affairs role. She served as International Port Security Liaison Officer based in the Netherlands at the United States Coast Guard Activities Europe with a portfolio across Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Next became the Western Hemisphere Desk Officer in Washington, D.C. She learned Portuguese through the State Department before selected to serve at the pleasure of the White House and Secretary of Homeland Security in 2021 and 2022. Notable IPS missions include the first visit to Sierra Leone, post-Ebola breakout, capacity building, and legal assistance to Ukraine, and the inaugural Port Security Management Seminar to Panama. Natalie, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Just set. Is the screen up and running?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mona. Welcome, colleagues and esteemed experts. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here among incredible experts and an honor to present. Again, Natalie Moyer. I've been in the international domain with the focus on the ISPS code for about a decade, and currently my responsibility is a capacity building instructor. I do see some familiar faces, so many of you either remember me from my role as a liaison officer or are working with some of my counterparts that are currently liaison officers. For this presentation, I'll deliver a bit of a different lens, more of a comprehensive overview, and discuss how the IPS program has observed how ports can strengthen their resilience against natural disasters through the comprehensive risk management. This draws on lessons learned, discussions, and proactive approaches for layered security and stakeholder collaboration. Fortunately, being in the IPS program, we are able to discuss some of these measures with our trading partners and industry partners. The course aligns with the ISPS code's mandates, and perhaps some of you have been present for the seminars and facilitated this presentation. Natural disasters and the port vulnerabilities. So as we know, ports are the lifeline to national and global economy. However, their location and complexity makes them vulnerable to national disasters, especially those hurricanes and flooding disasters. The ISPS code does require port facilities to assess their threats and vulnerabilities, to evaluate them. However, the real-world events show the need for this continuous and ongoing vigilance. When our ports close due to those natural disasters, the supply chains are disrupted across the entire global economy, and the recovery can be slowed by infrastructure damage, access issues, among other non-security related matters. These challenges highlight the importance of anticipating those risks and preparing robust responses, strategies, and making those contingency and response plans per the ISPS code. The comprehensive risk management and the layered approach. The comprehensive risk management involves those coordinated activities that control risk at every level of port operations. The ISPS code emphasizes a layered approach, does not require, but emphasizes the layered approach through physical security, procedural controls, technological measures, and as of 2021 does require the cyber lens. Some risk identifications starts with recognizing those hazards, whether they be operational, natural, or cyber. The risk assessments evaluate the vulnerabilities and consequences that are relevant and applicable to the actual port layout or specifically a port facility, and ranking them based on their criticality. The risk treatment includes strategies like acceptance, avoidance, loss and prevention or reduction, and to transfer. Through that layered security approach, it ensures that if one of those measures that we have in place or a process fails, we still have additional safety nets to help maintain the operations, the safety and security of the port. So a four-part approach to building port resilience. Resilience is much more than surviving these natural disasters. It's about that anticipation, preparing, responding, and then recovering effectively so that we can resume those port operations, but we know that they're safe and secure and, of course, in compliance with the ISPS code. For anticipation, we want to be proactive, forward leaning, use those predictive analytics, any kind of early warning systems to monitor the weather and emerging threats. Preparing disaster response plans, we want to have those in place. Conduct regular training through those drills and exercises. Invest in robust infrastructure and also being mindful of those maintenance plans for that infrastructure. And of course, per the ISPS code, where the port facilities are required to maintain and test those securities and safety plans. When we're responding, we want to activate those emergency protocols. We don't want that to be the first time we're responding and taking action. We want to practice those while in that prepared section. We're activating those emergency protocols that we have tested to eliminate some of that unknown factor. We're coordinating with our stakeholders and ensuring that we have clear communication so everyone, it's a joint effort approach and it becomes a bit of a force multiplier rather than individually responding through the safety, security, or operational lens. And then the recovery aspect, we're evaluating and assessing the damage, prioritizing reopening. Can we reopen, but should we reopen? And applying any lessons learned for continuous improvement. And that speaks back to that prepared piece. Of course, this four-part approach helps us to minimize any of those disruptions and return to normal operations faster, focusing on that continuity, the consistency, and of course, in alignment with the ISPS code. As Mona highlighted, collaboration and synergy are key to the central effectiveness of risk management and resilience. The ISPS code calls for those stakeholder engagements to bring everyone in if they have a vested interest in the port operations. Entities such as the Port Authority, your local Coast Guard, any of your emergency agencies, additionally, those shipping lines, your customers, and the local community. Through port security committees, you can facilitate that information sharing and that joint decision making. This kind of highlights, again, the collaboration and the continuity piece. So when those port security committees, they become, if they're operated effectively, they then become they become a force multiplier for port ops, as well as the safety measures in place. Additionally, you can use regional partnerships similarly to this OAS opportunity and enable coordinated response and sharing of the information. And that kind of goes back to that mindset of we're all in this together, the one team, one fight mindset. So by working together, the port facilities for the nation can address those complex challenges, resolve conflicting interests, and build a stronger, more resilient port, and therefore their port operations. And finally, to conclude, the comprehensive risk management, as outlined in the ISPS code, is essential for port facility resilience. The collaboration communication pieces are critical both before, during, and after any kind of disaster or large-scale incident. The continuous improvement, learning from those real-world events and adapting our plans and policies that we have in place so that we can stay ahead. That's vital to maintain operations. We need to invest in the risk management framework and foster our partnerships and relationships and prioritize the resilience in port operations because we're all connected by the sea. So let's hope to use the lessons learned to build ports and supply chains that can withstand and recover from natural disasters. And that's all that I have. Thank you so much for your time and attention, everyone. I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for this excellent presentation and for sharing with us about the critical role of collaboration, continuity planning, proactive risk management, of course, always aligned with the ISPS code. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Jennifer Nugent-Hill. Jennifer is Senior Director of Governmental and Community Affairs at Tropical Shipping. Jennifer serves as the Senior Director of Governmental and Community Affairs at Tropical Shipping. Sorry for that. She joined Tropical Shipping in 1995 and held several management roles. She helps guide the company's public policy agenda in addition to managing its charitable giving programs. Her portfolio includes managing the company's Hallmark Community Strategic Disaster Management Program, as well as coordinating Tropical Shipping Emergency Business Continuity Planning. She's an accomplished leader and is one of the founding members of Tropical Shipping's corporate mentorship program. Her community service includes serving as chairperson of the Ocean Coastal Observers of the Virgin Islands, the Palm Beach North Chamber of Commerce, the Caribbean Private Sector Organization U.S. Business Council, and elected to the board of the Associated Industries of Florida. She is a proud member of several maritime professional organizations, such as the Women in International Shipping and Trade Association, WISTA, the Women in Maritime Association Caribbean, WIMEC, and the Caribbean and the American Caribbean Maritime Foundation. Jennifer is a certified associate business continuity professional and holds a master's degree in public administration. Thank you so much, Jennifer. We are so excited to have you today, and the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, and thank you. Thank you again to the OASCIPT and the SIP team. I love participating in your amazing work, as Mona described it. I couldn't help but thinking one of the greatest opportunity I've had is when the SIP honors the women in maritime in the entire Caribbean and Central America. And it's always wonderful to see these amazing women running ports. I am so proud and so honored. And I see my good friend Kemi Brewster over there in Barbados. I always give them a shout out because the work that they do there has been amazing, amazing. So I thank you for the opportunity. But if you don't mind bringing up my presentation, I'd like to just share a perspective after hearing, both Mona and Lieutenant Mori do an amazing job. I love the work of the Coast Guard and how well they have integrated themselves as a partner. And I want to, my purpose for this today, for being here, is to enhance the work that I see as an allied member of the OAS Inter-American Committee on Ports, and how significantly important it is for us to do what I call the true coordination and collaboration as a business partner with ports throughout 30 destinations in the Caribbean, and of course here in Florida. So when we talk about disaster risk management in ports as a user of port facility, it is always about how do we position ourselves to be a strategic partner engaging in the coordination of preparedness, response, and recovery. At the end of the day, the hope is that through what I think was an excellent presentation and the efforts that Mona described, but also what was just presented by Lieutenant Moyer from the Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard, that the role that all of us ought to always be thinking about is how we coordinate for the recovery and of one's community. But there's always people involved. Next slide, please. Because when we talk about what builds us or what makes a port resilient, it must start with consideration of people first. People are strategic in all aspects of port resiliency. And when I say people, I'm talking about all the stakeholders, including the communities that depends on a resilient port. And resiliency, I'll define in a minute from my perspective as a shipping line calling in ports. When I think about the purpose of the what I call the circle of preparedness, this is not a new invention, but those who are professionals in the space of emergency and disaster preparedness, management and response will always tell you that the preparedness, the cycle of planning begins to recover tomorrow, but people at the center of the preparedness strategy is always going to be critical. So the employees of the port, the captains of the ships, the folks who are doing the paperwork to get us in, to get your cargo off the ships or on the ship, and ultimately the communities of businesses and users that are dependent on what you're bringing on your vessel. So we believe without a doubt that the cycle of preparedness allows for the response to be better traction. It's almost as if it's in what we call today a flywheel or a cog, is that one thing is dependent on the next side doing what it should do. And if you're going to have an effective response in ports, ultimately it's going to be based on a strategically well-articulated recovery plan. And at the end of the day, the lesson is always, what did we learn from our preparedness when we tested the plan? What did we learn about the gaps that came about from our response? And how did we put mitigation measures? So the next slide will share with you what I consider to be a most important part of all ports. It's what we do when we monitor. You may look at all these and say, what are those pretty colors there? What are those dots? All of you on this call, or I should say majority of you on this call, understands that in one day, these are all the ships that are floating around the Caribbean. Now, I prepared this particular slide, and I usually try to update it following what the marinetraffic.com has on their site. That's a typical site that I depend on. But can you imagine, this is the Caribbean and Central and Latin America countries. We are busy. These are ships. The ports, as was stated by Mona and again by Lieutenant Moyer, is the lifeline to our economies. The next slide will show you in terms of how, as a user of the port, if you could bring up my next slide, will show you where tropical shipping plays a role in this as one of your shipping partners. The next slide, please. So tropical operates, and that previous slide showed you how busy the Caribbean waterways are, coastal areas, ports. For me, as a representative of our company, this is how tropical shows up. These red spots shows you where we're across the region and in terms of how we support the markets. So when you look at the slide that has all those business, some of those ships that you saw in that are being monitored and administered by most of you who are on this call as you run your ports. So we depend on a consistent best practice in how we design a disaster recovery plan. The policy we believe to be true, because we've tested this, and as a certified business continuity professional, when I came to tropical, I wanted to be authentic. I understood what it is to be in the worst kinds of disasters. St. Croix is my home. I live in Florida, so I see the weather systems all over. But we don't just focus on the idea of storms. It's what we think about, it's what we live, it's what's disruptive for us. But we believe that there is no organization that can afford to function without a robust business continuity plan. In our case, we shorten it by abbreviated BCP. But the same phrase applies to what we call comprehensive disaster mitigation measures, whether it's with CDMAs and some of the other partners that we're also associated with. As a professional in writing business continuity plan, I believe this without a doubt. The cost of not having a robust business continuity plan is just too high. We operate and live in disaster-prone areas, such as the ports that are on this call. So the 31 ports that Tropical supports, next slide, takes us into a best practice approach for ourselves. What we have observed, and I've been with Tropical 31 years, so I've seen every kind of disaster. I have seen storms, I've seen hurricanes, I've seen floodings, I've seen earthquake, I've seen volcanic activities in almost every one of the areas that we traverse. Every port has had some experience and disruption in that. So it forced us to say to ourselves as a company, what would be the key principles in this cycle of disaster management? Because at the end of the day, and I'll restate that on my final slide, that when you are talking about disaster management, what you're actually saying, how best can I manage the cycle of a disaster when it happens? So we always recommend that a rapid and well-coordinated response to any crisis has to be paramount, and it is critical when you're managing an asset, as was so well stated by Mona. It is an asset. Ports are assets. And when I oftentimes talk with my government partners, I say it is the one area that I always say should never be politicized. You've got to make sure that your ports and the infrastructure and the necessity of it is always paramount. And I'll get to that in just a statement. Keep in mind, my background is public policy. I've served both in the government, in a governmental role where I shape laws and carry out policies, and are living some of those myself now for 31 years at Tropical. So I shared with you that the 4 phases are what they are. I won't repeat that. I think what was done by SIP has, and Mona has put that link. If you have never used that link, I talk about that best plan that I've ever seen. It's already written for each of our ports. Just fill in the blanks, put your name in there, call it your ports plan, and I promise you it will be one that will do you well. Now, when Lieutenant Moyer mentioned about the collaboration, I want to state that for us, what we see is that the 5th phase of the 4 phases of best practice in disaster management is collaboration with partners. Your partners are the private sector. Your partners are the shipping lines. Your partners are those individuals in your markets, in your location, that are dependent on you as a critical asset to get the markets or their economies up and running. Ports is a lifeline, and a rapid response mechanism is critical to the recovery. I mentioned a few seconds ago, and as a former highly placed political person, I will say this without apologies. It is critical. It is so critical for your location's economic resiliency that priority funding and access to resources be depoliticized. It should not be the whim of the next elected official to say ports are not significant. I encourage you to feel free to quote me as a business user of ports in the region that we really believe depoliticizing this economic resiliency location is important, our asset. As I mentioned, the OAS CIP disaster plan is available to you. I take a look at it. We have seen it. We've tested parts of it with our own terminal operations, and it has only reinforced my final point on this, is that a well-trained and nimble employees in ports must be deemed as essential workers. I won't take us back to COVID-19, but did we not see the importance of ports? I usually say when I'm speaking in any forum that I ask in the room, who are mothers or dads in this room? And I usually tend to talk to the dads. And I say, what's the first word you hope your children say? Is it mama or is it dada? And they say, of course, it's got to be dada. I says, well, I think COVID taught your new babies, your new children, their first word ought to be the essential importance of the supply chain, and that ports were important. The next slide, I'll bring that out as best as I can in that regard. So I say that to politicians everywhere that I go, that you've got to understand your essential workers are strategic in your location. We truly believe that the essential recovery requires every single strategic partners and a cooperation over one thing, the opening of a port. And this slide just was a reminder of, what we experienced in Anguilla a few years ago in getting that port open. The port needed to have what I call landing crafts coming in, bringing in important machineries to help clean up and get the recovery moving. We value the way that ports are different. Some ports can take large ships. Some ports don't have cranes. Some ports are shallow drafts. And the importance of how you write your plan to that specific port is absolutely important, and how you engage your partnership and your strategic partners. The next slide will share that's coming up now will take you to where I want to reinforce what should be some of the things you think about in your strategic action plans. And it has to be what was stated by the U.S. Coast Guard, is that you are always ensuring the safety of your personnel. The standards that was made reference, for example, in the ISPS code that all ports internationally and here in the US also agrees to. There are contents and portion of that talks about that at the end of the day, it's about safety. Safety during the disaster, but you can only do that when you have practiced your plan. You've got these guide that helps you to be actionable, as was mentioned by the presentation by the US Coast Guard. The idea around plan is that it helps you in the midst of a crisis to facilitate decision making. No one wants to talk about who should I call during the midst of a storm. A plan well developed and articulated helps you to make decision in a crisis when all the chaos is around you. But most importantly, you want to be able as a port facility to assure the users, the stakeholders, that you're ready to get back up and running. So in having said that, this next slide tells you that in order to have these strategic partners, strategic actions rather, you must have what I call essentials for your business continuity plan. For those of you who might remember, I mentioned in the previous slide that I don't believe port and port disaster planning ought to be politicized. I believe that it takes you to the executive level, whether the executive in your location is your port authority director, and if you're on the line, this is you, or the head of your country, the prime minister, the president, whomever it is, must understand that ports as a strategic asset needs to have their highest commitment. And so I say executive sponsorship is a must, because if they're not interested, then I don't see how anyone else will. Now, in writing your plan, the essential part is conducting that risk analysis, knowing your vulnerabilities, knowing the things that makes you most likely to be impacted. I threw in the word here about the use of technology and AI specifically, and that while there are lots of stuff going on with artificial intelligence, I've observed in several disasters, hurricanes that we have observed, that when technology is put in place, a very simple thing today, now it's simple, it wasn't back then, but just how you use drones, for example, to assess the damages of your ports or locations to get into the ports is so much a tool that I would encourage for us to be able to, because it speeds to you the visual rather than having to get people out who may not be able to get across areas that may have been impacted. When I think about Hurricane Maria that impacted Puerto Rico and some of the other islands, when I look at what happened with Melissa in Jamaica, I think one of the visual most important thing that helped responders and the folks who was the use of technology to be able to see ahead where the damages were and how to access those locations that were vulnerable. No plan is prepared without contingency planning. What are you going to do if you are impacted? There's a fire, a disaster, like a volcanic activity. You must have what I call a relocation strategy so that the ports can get themselves running, but also your technical teams who are writing your continuity plan and have your plan housed elsewhere, backup plans so folks can access it. And the minimal thing that I always say is have a backup plan. Simple, old-fashioned, handwritten plans. You'll be amazed at how what now may be good technology, but also there's nothing like having a manual document to you. And I close with this part of the next slide that says, in summary, and these are my key takeaway, a smart business continuity plan, which is a lively document. It isn't something you prepare and put away. It prepares the organization. It's got to be lively, meaning you're testing it, you're looking at where your gaps are, and the idea behind it is to minimize the impact of the disaster. And the most important part of it is that it helps you, it enhances your ability to recover, because you would have tested the plan based on you wrote a plan that's based on your risk, you tested it with your team, and at the end of the day, as persons running and operating a critical assets, you as the manager, you as the director, you as the ministers, it helps to control the outcome of the impact. No one can tell you that you minimize or you eliminate disasters. What it does is that you minimize and mitigate and control the outcome of the impact. And finally, this important slide shows a picture that I thought was most memorable. The final slide, please, is that it showed this amazing barge that was brought into Puerto Rico, which was through a collaborative operations with one of our sister company here at Tropical to move these. We wanted to get the stuff into Puerto Rico quickly. Come back to the last slide, please. The one that you were just on, that shows how. That's okay. We're going back. No, don't move forward. Don't go back. That's okay. That slide was to show that partnership was able to allow for the bringing in of those bucket trucks to get Puerto Rico's light power and light operations. Without a doubt, your presence here today tells me how significantly important this is to you. And so I look forward to the closing part of this by answering questions. Thank you very, very much for your time. Back over to you, Monica.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for another fantastic presentation. This was like a masterclass in business continuity. And I love what you said that ports are a lifeline and it's important we plan ahead to ensure their continuity. Thank you so much. And now I would like to continue with the Q&A session and to invite all of our speakers to join me in the screen so we can start. If Mona and Natalie could turn on their cameras, please, just so we can see you again. Excellent. Thank you so much. First question is for Mona. From your perspective at the Inter-American Committee on Ports, what are the biggest challenges Caribbean ports face in strengthening disaster risk management? And how is this project helping to address those gaps?
Thank you so much, Monica, for your question. Before I answer, I want to congratulate Jennifer and Natalie for two really, really insightful, fantastic presentations. It's an honor to share the stage with you. And I want to say it once again, it's an honor to also be on an all-female panel. So congratulations to you both. So Monica, your question was to what are some of the biggest threats or challenges Caribbean ports face, right, as it relates to disaster risk management, and how our project aims to address those gaps, right? I think in all of our three presentations, we saw that Caribbean ports operate in a very dynamic environment, right? Many of our ports in the Caribbean are multi-purpose ports, so they serve cruise vessels, as cargo and ro-ro. So a very complex dynamic environment with, of course, the significant exposure to natural hazards, but also human-induced hazards. So we see overall that there's a very strong commitment, and Jennifer spoke to that, a very strong commitment to improving preparedness across the region. We saw that in our project phase one. We see it today with the number of participants we have joining in this webinar, and we see real progress as it relates to the national level, along with a growing momentum for regional alignment. And from our point of view, or from our work at the SIP, this project that I presented builds on that momentum and it builds on that progress by providing this common framework, right? We see that the ports in the Caribbean, I always like to say the real experts in disaster risk management are the ports in the Caribbean, right? This is something you face on a daily. So we really want to build on that progress made by individual ports and provide this common regional framework. And hopefully through the training that we'll provide and through the tabletop exercises, we hope that we can also facilitate that enhanced coordination on a regional level. And ultimately, we of course hope this assists ports in becoming more proactive as it relates to the regional coordination. Again, our first phase was really looking more at the individual plans, right? But this next phase is really to address this coordination on a regional level, because oftentimes in the face of a disaster, a neighboring island becomes a direct stakeholder in disaster response. So that's really what we're trying to tackle here. And I would also like to highlight, I saw Mr. Wilfried Michaud from the Haitian Port Authority on the call. I don't know if he's still on the call. I can't see the participant list right now. But the Port Authority of Haiti actually adopted and implemented the SIP Model Emergency Operations Plan. It is also available in French, Portuguese, Spanish, and English. So just a big shout out to the Haitian Port Authority for using the plan. And like Jennifer said, it is really, it's a working document. You can take out what you don't need, you can make it your own, you can fill in the gaps. So just to encourage you again to take a look at the plan. We have a couple months ago actually send out a revised version. So all of the stakeholders that were part of the initial plan development reviewed it. So there are some updates we made to that plan. So that revised plan is now the most current version. I hope I was able to answer your question, Monica.
Yes, it was perfect. Thank you,
Okay.
Mona. And would you mind sharing the link to the plan to
Yes.
the audience in the chat? Thank you so much. Next question, sorry, is for Natalie. For a coastal port facility exposed to hurricanes, how would you differentiate between reducing vulnerability versus reducing consequence? And which measures would you prioritize first?
So this kind of takes us back from within the ISPS code, how we're preparing, vice responding, and kind of speaks to the drills and exercise and everything. So for the reducing vulnerability, focuses a bit more on preventing or limiting the damage from the actual hazard, while reducing the consequences focuses a bit more on minimizing the impact post-event or post-incident. I like to think of reducing the vulnerability a bit more like action items or checks. For examining hardening infrastructure, storm-rated cranes on the facility, or having flood barriers, or bringing flood barriers that are mobile, securing loose equipment, hazardous cargo, improving your drainage system, reinforcing your communication and power systems, or testing those plans so you have a true secondary or tertiary communication system. While the reducing the consequences, I like to think of more process oriented, procedure oriented, or like mutual agreements, because we'll need to call on our friends, call on our other agencies. So that's a bit more similar to the evacuation plans and personnel accountability, having those backup plans in place, and a continuity of operation. In some of our seminars, we like to speak about your drills and exercises, but then also having contingency and emergency responses, which are different in nature. So we're looking at those backup systems and a continuity of operation, as well as relying and leaning on those other agencies, mutual aid agreements, and recovery contacts, as well as pre-staging response resources if we're able to plan ahead and appropriately prepare. So initially, I would prioritize reducing the vulnerability, because that prevents and limits damage, and reducing the overall scale of the incident to allow us to return to operations. However, since hurricanes and natural disasters can't be stopped, it is a balanced approach. So we need to ensure that the consequence management, the recovery and continuity is equally as robust as those trainings, drills, exercises required in the code, so that we can appropriately respond with those continuity, contingency, or emergency response procedures. I hope that kind of balanced.
Yes, thank you so much, Natalie. Next question is for Jennifer. How can technology enhance the emergency management system in ports?
As a non-cybersecurity professional, let me just say this. My IT guys, whenever I say, hey, something's off with my computer, did you turn it on? It's a proverbial joke, but let me tell you, the respect that I have gained for the use of technology, and I didn't coin this concept. Anyone on this call can just go to what I call YouTube University and see how AI is being used as a predictive index to test your vulnerabilities, help craft, and yes, it's technology, people, so it's going to depend on your putting in the data. But one of the things that those of us who are required to maintain our certification as business continuity professionals, we're now realizing that AI and machine tools helps us to monitor systems in real time, as I said earlier, so you can get data and then determine how you react and respond in your ports. One of the things that I found that is an amazing use today is that in writing that plan, you can simulate your test, your exercise. You simulate what possibly could happen, and a team sitting around a table putting this in whatever your favorite AI tool is, then coming out with results that allows you to do true gap analysis and say, I've got to fix this. There is what we now call that the ability to predict potential disruptions in our cyberspace. A lot of us are putting things on the cloud, which I think is smart because it allows us to access that from anywhere, providing you're able to do so remotely. But think about what it does in helping what I call allowing optimization of the resources that you have, so that you can allocate the right amount of resources to the crisis. Not all of us need to show up at the same time. The modality of the use of technology allows for personnel that are working remotely that may be in places that they're not impacted directly by the storm, but they're part of the crisis response team and can access and be able to do what where the disaster is occurring, you're not able to react because you may have lost your thing. And then there's one final thing that I didn't mention, Monica, if you may, and it's not connected to technology in this sense, but rather a very practical thing of how resources can be utilized to support first responders. We worked here in Florida with legislators to create what we call the opportunity to protect first responders or help first responders to be able to do what they do best, which is help us to recover. We worked on a Good Samaritan legislation a few years ago in partnership with the private sector. And we say, would you come alongside with us to create the legislation that allow for it? Say, Monica, your house is not impacted. I live in your district. I'm part of the response team for the Port Authority, for the port, and my family is impacted. I know what I need to do. Would you allow for a family to, if you got an extra room or two, so that the responder isn't thinking about the damage that their personal family is experiencing? I was amazed how that legislation took traction, but I was also amazed at some of the detractors to that, because the biggest thing they were worried about is I could be sued if a member of the team is children are impacted. We say you do the right thing. And that's where we say the Good Samaritan legislation. We're not talking about waiving criminal activities, but rather it is the Good Samaritan to protect first responders in ports so they can get back up and do what they do best, which is open a port.
Well, amazing, Jennifer. Thank you so much for sharing about that legislation. It's very interesting to hear about that. Thank you. Mona, how will the new regional DRM coordination framework build on the Model Emergency Operations Plan? And what practical changes can ports expect in terms of preparedness and response?
Thank you, Monica. So the plan, which I shared the link in the chat, I hope folks were able to access it. It was an important foundation, of course. We've mentioned it during this call, and it aimed at providing ports a clear structure to strengthen the internal preparedness, response and recovery procedures. And this regional framework now builds on that by connecting these efforts across the countries in the Caribbean. And we hope to create through that a more unified approach. The plan will still be fundamental to this phase two, even though we're moving forward now to a more regional coordination framework. And I want to highlight it will be a framework. It's not a binding regional agreement. It's supposed to facilitate, to guide this regional coordination, but we, of course, fully believe in the sovereignty of our member countries. This will not be a binding document. This is really just a tool or a guideline. And so from our perspective at the SIP, We really think that this next phase is about unlocking the benefits of regional coordination and collaboration, and hopefully we'll see more streamlined communication during emergencies amongst the ports in the region, right? Knowing who to call, like Jennifer said, is key. Not only knowing who to call in your country, but also knowing who to call in the region. That is really unique to the Caribbean, right? Is the interconnectedness of the nations. We also hope that there will be stronger coordination amongst agencies. We'll be working very closely with SEDIMA, and overall, just through also the training that we will be providing, more opportunities to test the framework and to see if it is really applicable to the realities in the Caribbean. So overall, in summary, and hopefully able to answer that question, we want to see ports not only operate individually and as individual systems, but as part of a regionally coordinated and regional resilient network, and hopefully through that improve response recovery and overall regional resilience.
Thank you, Mona. Natalie, next question is for you. How do the four vulnerability factors, availability, accessibility, organic, security, and facility hardiness, change when assessing risk from a natural disaster instead of a threat to security? Sorry, of a security threat.
Yes. So when we shift the mindset from a security threat to responding to a natural disaster, of course these threats shift, but we're still kind of focused on the ISPS code specifically. So the availability is more like the location of the port facility. This now becomes more of the lens of the facility's exposure to the hazard rather than it is preventing items, things from getting out. So think of whether or not the port facility is located in a flood bed or in a storm surge zone. For accessibility, this refers to how easily the hazard can impact the facility. Are we on a peninsula? Are we open to the coastline? What type of perimeter fencing do we have? What are our policies and procedures or monitoring procedures? Are we in a low elevation with poor barriers? Whereas the organic security or physical security structures then shift from deterrence and prevention, and they're a bit more into the preparedness and response capabilities. So did we train our personnel? Do we have emergency procedures? Have we practiced those? Or are we responding and recovering for the first time when we have a natural disaster? We're kind of for the security measures, it shifts, and now we're relying on what do we know? Did we practice it? Do we know how to take the first step to respond and recover? Whereas the facility itself then becomes the most critical factor, because now we're focusing on the structural resiliency. If we're now able to continuously withstand environmental factors, previously, it's how are we preventing security breaches? How secure can we maintain our facility? So it kind of, the vulnerabilities, the mindset shifts from intentional threat prevention, those preventative measures, back to resiliency, survivability, under, of course, in compliance with the safety and security measures in the ISPS code. And really it kind of goes back to ensuring we're practicing what we preach. So we're learning from our tabletop exercises, our drills, or seminars like this, and implementing those lessons learned, and they're translated into measurable improvements, not just the documentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Natalie. And last question of this Q&A session is for Jennifer. How can ports managers enhance their own individual port business continuity planning processes, especially when the infrastructure has been compromised?
I think what Natalie and Mona just said in response to their previous question is exactly it. What I like about partnership like this is, and again, speaking as a private sector, as a business, is that we view every single port as an individual entity because of the nature of the design of that port. So it forces us to think through always about safety protocol first, but it asks the question, what do we know about that specific location and how we can help a port manager to develop strategies. We conduct as a part of our annual giving back into the community what we call a public-private partnership workshop series on disaster preparedness for specific islands. So for example, over the last 2 years, I would say at least 25 years ago, we came alongside with SEDEMA, which is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency for the region, and every individual port disaster management agency. So for example, coming up latter part of next month, we're hosting in St. Vincent as an example. We've got them in several places. Doing one in Puerto Rico, we're doing one in the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands. And we have asked each of those locations to bring to the table their local partners at ports to hear the conversation from a public-private partnership perspective. And what we intend to do at those workshops, as we've done many years, is ask for a collaboration of businesses to come alongside with their resources to support their markets or their islands or their location by first and foremost applying what may be skills or resources that they may have. So if it's technical skills in helping ports to test a plan, to write a plan, partner with the local disaster management agencies. I always go back to some of the best partners that I've ever worked with running these programs for the last 30 years. St. Vincent has been a model for me. When I think of Michelle Forbes, who is the head of St. Vincent National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, Michelle, interestingly, has been impacted by not only hurricanes, but she's had volcanic activities. And over the years, I've watched how she has seized the opportunity of lessons learned as an individual operator to partner with the ports in St. Vincent. Best examples of how, when your port is impacted, coordinate with your other location. Mona said that, which is why I think SEDEMA's best practices in coordination and ports integration, they've got some really great ideas that if I was an individual port manager in any of the islands, I would be partnering with my local emergency management agency, coordinating with SEDEMA as the overall for the region, and reaching to partners. I won't speak for Natalie, but I can tell you the Coast Guard has been a really good partner in the Caribbean in sharing best practices and code. I don't think there will ever be a no from anyone who sees a robust port authority jumping into how do we make resiliency in ports. It's the lifeline. It is what happens in economies to get up and running. So if I was an individual operator, I would be reaching across the aisles to my partners and say, what resources do you have that I can tap into testing my plan or writing my plan in the first place? Because every business continuity plan is local and it's different, but the framework, as Mona has aptly described, can be utilized that generates certain things. None of my plans in all of the 29 locations Tropical has a ship that goes in is written to corporate. It's written to each of those islands, but it's based on certain parameters and best practices.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jennifer. What you mentioned is very important to reach out and ask or share successful practices. This way we are stronger and more prepared. Thank you. With that, we finished the Q&A session. I would like to sincerely thank all of our speakers for their valuable insights and contributions. Throughout the session, we explored the growing challenges ports face in an increasingly complex environment. What clearly stands out is that port resilience is no longer optional, it is essential. We heard how a comprehensive risk management approach can significantly strengthen port operations. Equally important is the role of collaboration and communication across stakeholders, as well as the need for continuous learning and adaptation based on real world experiences. On behalf of the SIP Secretariat, I would like to thank our audience for joining us. We look forward to continuing this important conversation in future events. I would like to give the opportunity to the speakers to say goodbye to the audience. Mona, I see you first. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure, thank you so much. Again, just congratulate my fellow speakers and of course also Monica for this excellent webinar. I learned a lot, I always do. So this was really a fantastic opportunity to learn, to share experiences, and I thank everyone for participating. And I just want to remind everyone, you will be getting an email from me with the survey, the assessment that we will be doing, the capabilities assessment. So I invite you to please join, as your feedback and your input will be invaluable for the development of a framework that is relevant to your needs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mona. Natalie, I see you next.
Yes, thank you so much. This is such an honor. Hopefully I can see many of the participants when we travel downrange, but to be here and kind of learn, just as Mona said, to learn from the other panelists, this was fascinating. Usually I'm the one trying to facilitate. So it's been an honor to be on a panel of strong, like-minded, powerful women to also absorb while I'm in a fortunate position to be able to hone some of our examples downrange. So thank you again and congratulations to everyone. I look forward to hopefully seeing some more familiar faces on my travels.
Thank you, Natalie. And last but not least, Jennifer.
Thank you. Again, just to restate, disaster risk management in ports with a strategy that is well coordinated and collaborate. I always say a connected port is a resilient port, and some things you don't have to really take the stress on. Get with your partners, get your private sector engaged at the table. I promise you, there are lots of businesses that are willing to support and engage in your local. And without them, they've got an ownership. So ports are the front lines, and the infrastructure is critical to your economies. Thank you so much for having us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Jennifer. And with that, we finish today's webinar. Thank you to everyone who connected and joined us today. Have a great day and see you in the next webinar.
It has been a fantastic event. The Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Ports brought us together today to explore comprehensive risk management and port resilience in the face of natural disasters across the Americas. Thank you to Mona Swoboda from CIPOAS, Lieutenant Natalie Moyer from the United States Coast Guard, and Jennifer Nugent-Hill from Tropical Shipping for sharing their experience and vision with our entire port community. We look forward to welcoming you at our next CIPOAS webinar. See you soon.